Welcome back to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfield, and along with my good friends JJ and Desiree Hurtak, we've been investigating the UFO field for many, many years. Of course, Dr. JJ is one of the original investigators going back to the 70s with J. Allen Hynek, John Mack, Elizabeth Satori, many people he's been colleagues with, and Desiree has joined him over the years, and I've just written a book called Making Contact, which is a collection of essays by people I consider the best and brightest in the field. So today we're really excited about what Bret Lueder has to share with us about his investigations into the field, because it is, like you said, Bret, it's such a vast and complex field. So that's my introduction. You have anything to add, Desiree, JJ?
Yes, we're very honored to be here. Bret is a great researcher. We're honored that we are all investigating the positive as well as we will call the experimental side, the trickster side of the UFO story. And I had the privilege to work behind the scenes on very high levels back in the 70s as an independent scholar of ancient languages, Near Eastern cultures, Egyptology, and of course, I was thrilled to experience evidence of the so-called Billie Meier story in Switzerland. Right. I had an earlier contact with an angelic, we will call ultra-terrestrial intelligence by the name of Enoch, or as he is called in Arabic, Idris. And I was told that there was really a rivalry going on in the local heavens as to the nature of the human race, that our spiritual survival would be to realize the integrity of our soul, our higher consciousness, the compassionate side of our heart, and that if we would take the higher path, the higher frontier, we would work with those emissaries of light, those who represent the higher plan and teaching for all humanity.
Yeah, and I think Bret agrees with us when we talk about the actions of those connected with the Pleiades, and who are the Pleiades and who are others who claim to be the Pleiades. Is that something you want to talk about today, Bret?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite subjects, the Billie Meier case. And, of course, I'm a student of myself, and who am I and where am I from? This all kind of plays into it. Ufology has seemed to support that kind of trajectory that I'm on. So yeah, this is the first time I've ever had a show like this myself, where I'm sharing the duties. It's a pleasure to be on your show, Alan. This is also going to be called episode 101 of the Bret Lueder Show. And I'm definitely honored that you guys have joined me on my show and that we're merging like this. This is an exciting opportunity to do something new. And I think we're going to make some magic today. I also have a new book coming out. It's called Agents of Ascension, UFO PR. And it's basically about how public relations has controlled the UFO narrative from the very beginning. And part of that discussion is this idea of the Billie Meier case and what it represents. Arguably the biggest case in U.S. World history, that at least that's ongoing. It started in the 70s. Cases seem to, people get abducted or they have visitations. They start and stop. The Billie Meier case started in the early 70s. It seems to be ongoing and to the perpetuity. And I think at the center of that is this figure known as Semjase, which I think we're all going to be chiming in on today, and what the ramifications of who or what that being might be in terms of human spirituality growth and the future of humanity.
Yeah, and a lot of this research started with Wendell Stevens, Colonel Wendell Stevens, who then got Britt and Lee Elders involved to really research this. And of course, we also spent time in Switzerland where the case was. And we know many people who had gone to the farm, who had communicated directly with Billie Meier and who had done some additional research.
Well, let's give a little background to Billie Meier. He was a Swiss, I don't know, farmer or something.
Farmer who spent time
one arm, and he had fantastic pictures of UFOs. And in the 70s, was it the early 70s?
Yeah. 1975.
Well,
one sort of blurry picture of a Pleiadian woman he called Semjase, and that kind of was a huge kind of injection into the UFO field of this reality that maybe it's true. Of course, Some people claimed he was debunked later by faking some of those pictures. They looked like garbage can covers. I don't know how much that is true or not true. And I've just interviewed someone part of his team who says he's still making contact. He's still writing books. So why don't you give us an overview of the case, Bret, because it's so vague and controversial, and where do you stand on it? And just, yeah, start with the beginning of how Billie Meier's made contact, maybe.
Okay, so the way I understand it, and JJ and Desiree, please correct me if I get any facts wrong. He's a simple, humble farmer who was chosen because of his humbleness, because of his family-oriented nature, and his basic innocence. And the way I understand it was a ship lands in his field, a beautiful woman gets out, makes contact with Billie Meier, who's I can only imagine was speechless, and sits him down under a tree and tells him the history of humanity. That has unfolded in Wendell Stevens' work over 6 books. There's been lots of spin-offs. Guido Musburger wrote a good book. Maurice Osborne wrote another couple good books based on that. And of course, today we have Michael Horn, who is kind of carrying that mantle and is kind of the world kind of spokesperson for the Billie Meier case through the organization FIGU. And I forget what FIGU stands for. It's an acronym. But, reading those 6 books by Wendell Stevens, Contact from the Pleiades, the 2 coffee table books at first, and then there's Messages from the Pleiades. I think it's 6 books, maybe 8, I forget exactly, but wow, what a story. Unfolding where humans are from, how they got here, who the original Pleiadians were that came here. I've been fascinated by the parallels between that original story from Semjase and the Book of Enoch, because they're describing similar scenes. Semjase refers to the leader of that expedition as Pelagon, and whereas the Book of Enoch has the name Semjase, which is the name of the alien that's supposedly telling Billie Meier this information. So that's been a fascinating juxtaposition as I'm exploring my own spirituality and who I am, and trying to learn about the world around me and the information that's actually out there and not presented to us in the mainstream media or in high school growing up.
Well, we have an expert on Enoch right here in our midst. Right. And so.
Yeah, let me just, pick it up. We got very close to Wendell Stevens, mostly because he was, as we mentioned, investigating Semjase and the Billie Meier case, but he saw also that Dr. Hurtak had in his book from the 1973, which Wendell, as far as he was concerned, Dr. Hurtak did not take it from the Billie Meier case because it was almost simultaneously that it came out, or even 2 years before in terms of his experience. Let me read you a couple of things from the Keys of Enoch. First of all, it's
Key 110.
Yeah, verse 18. When I was taken into Merkaba, I was shown how the fallen legions of Semjase were disbanded and dispatched to 3-dimensional worlds like Earth. Now, going back for a minute to Key 106, and this really did come out right, and I was there. I was one of Dr. Hurtak's students in 1973 in January when he came back, and he gave every student of his at the time at California Institute of the Arts a calligraphy text that had this, and it says, our universe was created out of the light synthesis of the next universe, the Pleiades, the cradle and throne of our consciousness. So Dr. Hurtak, in this sense, agreed with Billie Meier that our species, who we are, what we call the Adamic species, is from the Pleiades, is connected with the Pleiades. But that does not mean, when you go a little further, and I'll hold for that for right now, that all the Adamic species is working on a positive level.
I met Wendell Stevens later in the late 70s, and I met with him and also 2 colleagues. One, Ellen Ames, had worked for NASA and was responsible for the special tests that were done at Jet Propulsion Lab in Los Angeles. And I accept the authenticity of the film material that Billie Meier had submitted independently to investigators. I also had as one of my students the late Roger Davis, who actually met Billie Myers and stayed with him in his community in Switzerland. So I knew some of the players, including some of the top technical specialists who had looked at the Billie Myers material. I also was close to Marcel Vogel from IBM, who tested the metal fragments and found that they were unique and authentic. And so my interest came much later because my book was already in circulation in Switzerland, in Germany, and Austria, and other places, because I was profoundly influenced in a deep state of prayer by the manifestation of a luminous being who identified himself as Enoch.
And also taught him the past, present, and future of this planet, and also how we relate to the stars.
And that was shown that there was a dialectic between those who would respect us as the Adamic seed, namely to use this symbolic language going back to the Adam and Eve story, and those who would violate our genetics and manipulate the human psyche to go in a different direction.
Wait, before we get too far off the track of Billie Myers, I want to address some of the controversies that surround him that maybe Bret and the Hurtaks can clear up. First, I never heard he was just a simple farmer. He was in the Foreign Legion where he actually lost his arm. I don't know if he was an assassin. I don't know what he was doing there. I don't know if that's even true. So, you know, he may be a humble guy. I've never met him, but he has a bit of a past from what I've heard. And what about the other stuff about the pictures, all that, Bret? How do you defend the Billie Myers case?
Well, just to address the lost arm, I believe it was a conversation between either Billie Myers and Semjase or maybe Ptah, where it was shown that Billie Meier had been on this path for his whole life. He was being prepared for this contact, even though he didn't know it. And so, of course, we all have former life experiences, right? Part of his was in the military. I have plenty of family members in the military, so I don't really look at that as a controversial. But he lost his arm supposedly in a motorcycle accident, and according to it was either Semjase or Ptah, that was to teach him to get out of his humanity, so to speak, kind of like the Buddha loses an arm, and so the Buddhists salute with one hand like this in reference to that, and so, you know, what a spiritual lesson to have to learn. I pray to God all the time, please don't let me have to lose a limb to be able to find out who I am. But I can also see where that would be advancing a human being entrenched in the flesh to start to look outside of the flesh, that we're more than just the flesh, but we're actually the spirit. We're a spirit having a human experience inside a meat bag, basically full of water and meat. And so that's what I remember about that part of the story. As far as hoaxing photos, I can't really say for sure, but what the pattern that I see, and it's in a lot of cases, is that they'll start out very genuine, and maybe at some point a human being's ego is challenged, or their want for success or maybe monetary gain comes in. And so I don't know this about Billie Meier, but there's the chance, I think, that maybe he did fake some photos to try to prove himself, because he knew what he was doing was real. But then when enough people kind of poo-poo you and keep telling you you're full of it, you know, that eventually you know, you tell a man something long enough, he's going to believe it, kind of a thing, right? So he has to try to battle that. So I try to give Billie Meier a little bit of leeway on his own spiritual path, growing through some of these things that us humans have as hurdles in our lives. If we're going to get to that end goal of knowing ourselves and ascension or activating our light bodies. So even if that did happen, I still think that the case was real, because one of Lee and Bret Elder's friends was a man named William Henderson Everone. And William Henderson Everone was Jack Pappy Henderson's grandnephew. So if you remember Roswell history, Jack Pappy Henderson is the pilot that flew the wreckage from Roswell to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Well, Jack Pappy's brother was William's dad, and they lived in San Diego. So when Jack Pappy Henderson was done with that mission and flying the wreckage from Roswell, he came back to San Diego and told his brother and his brother's family, including my friend William, who was 12 at the time, he said, I saw live bodies, right? And so that started William off on this path of ufology. So William, at some point in his past, met Lee and Britt Elders and Wendell Stevens. And so I got to hear directly from William a bunch of insider stuff about Lee and Britt Elders and Wendell Stevens and the case and stuff that was going on, little shenanigans that were going on with that group. And so as a young ufologist, I met William here in Chico, and he passed away, 5 or 6 years ago now. And but we used to hang out all the time, and just hearing that stuff gave me insight into the buzz that was around that case. And that buzz was that it was very real and that it was a mystery. But it was like any good mystery, there's each next thing was prompting people to keep going. Like stuff would come up that would negate it, and then something else would come along to refute the negation. And so, I find that this is true in life and within many aspects of humanity and our civilization, our society, where like the idea of free energy gets poo-pooed by maybe someone that works for PG&E or Westinghouse. But then you go and you look online and there's all this information, like John Cyril is one guy who's produced a free energy machine. There's actually thousands of people that have done this. So it's like it kind of keeps your interest going, right? Even though the mainstream narrative is kind of anti all this kind of stuff. So I apply that lens to the Billie Meier case and other cases. And so I tend to go with the more, as a hunch, following my intuition, I tend to go with the incredible information as opposed to the mainstream or safe place to be, because I think that safe place is being cultivated by the group of people that JJ described earlier that were entrusted with the Adamic races and genetics, but steering it in a way that was not divine.
Thank you.
I agree with Bret on that. And I think originally the data was accurate. The pictures were accurate, that you see in Contact in the Pleiades in the very original book. But ultimately, when he had to produce this, for people coming from America and all over the world, and they wanted to see things, I think he started creating some of that just to be able to show what he saw, and even though they weren't appearing anymore. So I think that that's really what happens, and it does happen to a lot of people. That's why I like the Keys of Enoch, because Dr. Hurtak wrote it down in the 70s. 73
prior to the Meier
and now
contact.
We can build on that, saying this is what it was. But one of the interesting things that I'd like to get into, if we can, Alan and Bret, is the fact of how it relates to Enoch, and going back to the original book of Enoch. And we have a copy here that Dr. Hurtak's going to read, because the Semjase, which is very strange that Billie Meier would receive in some way that name, because it's not considered a positive name in the ancient legends. So Dr. Hurtak, you want to just say a few words of who Semjase was?
Semjase is characterized as the leader of a group of fallen angels that came down about Hermon. More importantly, modern scholars, Christian, Judaic, and others recognize that Mount Hermon is the place of the experience of transfiguration of Jesus in the New Testament. But it was really the place where the fallen hierarchy had come down. According to the original writings of the Book of Enoch in the Greek and the Ethiopic, weapons of war were given to the peoples of the earth from Mount Hermon. This is reading now chapter 6, Book of Enoch, Charles edition, chapter 6. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heavens, saw and lusted for them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjase, who was their leader, said unto them, quote, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin, end of quote. And they all answered and said, quote, let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing, and we commingle with the daughters of humanity. And then they all swore together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it, And they were all 200 who descended in those days of Jared on the Mount Hermon, on the summit, I should say, of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual implications upon it. And these are the names of their leaders. The very first one is Semjase, their leader, and then afterwards comes the name. So the ancient biblical scholars in the Enochian and mystical tradition went out of their way to specify Mount Hermon, Semjase by name, and I'm talking about the etymology of this ancient spelling, as well as the angelic leaders. We would call them today the breakaway angelics who experimented with the human genetics.
So basically, if you go on, it's interesting to find the fact that further writings connected with Billie Meier connected Semjase not necessarily with the Pleiades, although that was the origin, and that's our origin too, as far as we're concerned as an Adamic species. But Semjase was coming from Lyra. This is some of the writings, and maybe Bret, you can follow up on this.
This is what Colonel Stevens told me privately. He said there was a contradiction in the information that was given by the entity known as Semjase to Billie Meier, that she told him she was not from the Pleiades, but from Lyra, Lyra, a different constellation.
And that would make more sense. I want to go on a little bit more with the Book of Enoch, but what did you hear about this, Bret or Alan?
You know, I interviewed Wendell Stevens myself, and he told me the same thing. And I was shocked to hear that, because here is this being that's portraying herself as a benevolent friend of the humans that's here to help us with some of our own problems, maybe to reach a hand down to help lift us up as a species. And they're lying. So this is kind of like, in its own way, kind of like when my mom finally told me that there was no Santa Claus. I was a little put off by that. Didn't mean I didn't love my mom anymore, but I started me questioning, well, okay, so it is okay to lie sometimes, right? And so me on my own spiritual growth.
Wait. You lost me. You lost me there, so, Bret, a little bit. So they're to talk about what they're lying about.
They're lying about where they're from. Yes, they weren't from the Pleiades. They're from Lyra, which is supposedly much closer to the galactic center. And some say the origin of humanity is from Lyra, and then we've spread out over the cosmos, but kind of like in a Star Wars kind of scenario.
We would think that's the lie. We are really more from the Pleiades, which in a certain sense is connected with
indigenous traditions all over the world.
But also, why would they lie about that? No one even knows the difference. I mean, what's the point?
Well, if they were going to genetically change or update what they felt was a different direction of humanity, they would change the information codes as to the origin of the species.
And I was saying the Pleiades is connected with Orion. From what Dr. Hurtak was shown in the Keys of Enoch, Orion is the vortex to other realities, to other, we'll say, cosmoses. And so that's why the seed is there and spread out. But I think they would also say that they are originally, like we are originally from the Pleiades, are connected with that seed program. They are a sub-seed program now working out of Lyra.
But how do you know Billie Meier's Semjase is not lying? How do you know what's the truth? I mean, we're not in a good position to know the truth. Let's go back to Billie Meier, because I don't want to get too far away from that case. I think your piece there, JJ, was really good, but yeah, let's focus on the case to see, even if that's true, and I think Bret is pretty convinced it's true, but what evidence do you have, Bret, that it really is? Because no one's seen Semjase. I mean, only seen pictures. We only have Billie's stories and his writings, and he's still writing. And I mean, it's great, but where's the proof of any of this? Yes, those photographs are amazing, but go ahead, tell us, Bret, why you're so convinced about that reality.
Well, so first of all, on a spiritual path, you don't always have the luxury of getting physical evidence. These decisions you have to make from your heart, and you discern the best you can. I've interviewed Desiree and JJ about discernment, and it's very tricky on Earth. So what I look at with the Billie Meier case is simply philosophical deduction. I look at it as, okay, there's this being coming here who's lying to us. Well, why would they need to lie? I think that was a really good question, Alan. That's something that I've asked myself too. So, as I've studied law, which seems like it's a separate subject from ufology, um, there's this idea of contracts, and contracts have four elements to them, including full disclosure, and contracts also have four ways to respond to any contract. And so, if you get offered a contract, you can agree with it, which gives it a green light to move forward. You can counteroffer, which sends the ball back into the offeror's court. You could argue with it, which gives it a green light to go forward, or you can stay silent, which is known as acquiescence, which in law means that they can move forward with whatever that offer was because you were on dishonor now. So the way to always go is the counteroffer, right? So I look at Semjase as coming here, and I don't know if this is true, but Michael Horn doesn't want to really address this issue when I bring it up to him, is that Semjase has come here and said, this is who I am. I am the leader of the fallen angels. Do you accept it? Do you agree with it? Do you argue with it? Do you stay silent, or do you counteroffer? I think in large part humanity stayed silent. So whatever agenda this being has, it's got the green light to move forward from a spiritual standpoint. And so I don't think it's a mistake that her name is Semjase. I think it's a bona fide offer to tell us who she is and see how we respond.
Most people don't even know what it means. So the base of where I want to get to in this discussion is, okay, we can go back and forth all day about the truth and not the truth, but what can we learn, and what can people learn from our conversation? What can they learn from Billie Meier and his content, and what the Hurtaks have to offer as well?
Well, let me just continue on for a minute about the Mount Hermon. Now, it's interesting that some people now think that even the transfiguration took place in Mount Hermon, that Mount Hermon was a vortex on planet Earth, connecting the earth to the heavens. Right now, it's right in the middle of Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. So what do we find there? We find conflict, and we find, we'll say, major
horrendous
tension.
Wars.
Well, tension, at least tension at this point. So that's an interesting point that they use that location. The second aspect in all of this is the fact of what happened when, as Dr. Jack had written, as Dr. Jack had read in the ancient book of Enoch, when they had relations with the daughters of man, it was like abductions, okay? I mean, maybe they weren't talking about taking them to spaceships, but what they talked about was their offspring became that of Earth intelligence and, we'll say, giant types of intelligence. It was so bad on the planet, if you continue to read the ancient book of Enoch, that the flood came to wipe out the we'll say, bad genetics that this had caused, and so we could go back to the original Adamic species. I'm not saying this. This is what the book of Enoch, that's really at least, thousands of years old,
and many believe is the foundation for two books in the New Testament, of the Epistle of Peter, First Epistle of Peter and Second Peter.
So in a sense, it means that they want to have relations or connections with us, but we are also from maybe part of that original Pleiadian seed contact, we'll say higher connection, because we don't personally feel, in terms of the Keys of Enoch, Dr. Hurtak's book, that we evolved on this planet, that we really did come from star seeds in the heavens. And so our seed is actually fairly potent, and that's why we were just Alan talking with Linda Moulton Howe, and she's also saying, and Whitley Strieber, that they're interested in not only our blood, our genes, but even our souls. So
well, let me say this. Ellen and I know Bud Hopkins, who was a very interesting researcher, top artist, and a person who was responsible for a television series on what we will call the intruders, those who are using us for medical experiments. And Bud Hopkins, before he died, on film said that there were certain aberrations in the personality of Billie Meier he could not accept. This is repeated also by Timothy Good, who worked with Admiral Hill Norton from the United Kingdom, and other top individuals, including Jim and Carl Lorenzen, who were head of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in the United States, all who agreed when they looked at all of the details, said there were certain incongruities they could not fully accept. And this is the dilemma, is do you go to the experts or do you go to subjective analysis and come to your own independent conclusions?
Right. And I want to say there's more books from Billie Meier in the German language than there are in the English language. So I would encourage if people want to see really what he wrote, see if you can read German and find those books. It's really quite, I would say ethnic in that sense.
I was surprised that there was so much anti-Semitism in the other writings of Billie Meier's that Marcel Vogel, top scientist at IBM, had privately shared with me. Now we're talking in the 1970s, and the keys of Enoch, I believe, were given as a example of having to go with the higher intelligence that would respect us rather than indicate situations.
I never heard about the anti-Semitism in Billie Meier stuff. I know he's also still writing books. I mean, he's still at it. He's like, what, 80, maybe 90?
And they're all mostly in German because they have not been translated. And there is an anti-Semitism. You don't see it. That's what I was just saying.
I didn't hear about that. What do you think about the anti-Semitism?
Just
Tell
before
us,
I get
Bret.
to the anti-Semitism part, and it's definitely in the Wendell Stevens work too, it's mentioned. But just to cap off the last point, either Semjase is telling us who she really is, or this is the biggest PR gaffe maybe in cosmic history. Because why would intelligent beings choose to send a representative with a name of one of the most notorious figures in human history? So I don't think that's what they did. I think this is a bona fide offer of saying this is who I really am. So that's my conclusion there. As far as the anti-Semitism, they do talk about, Semjase talks about the Giza intelligences and how they live underground. And it's the Jews are the main problem. All right, that's basically summing it up.
This is a very good study of how we must have rules of discernment, that everybody in the greater cosmos, of which there are more than 82 cosmic cultures identified by MUFON to this date, can play the role of a savior figure or angelic host that simply gives us the idea as a recipe that takes us off the planet. We have to be careful as to the information. The information, according to my logic, would have to be highly humanistic, favoring all people who will be given the opportunity of spiritual and scientific growth. Secondly, there would have to be knowledge that would be put on the table, scientific knowledge, that is, so independent scholars could validate or not validate the information of the scientific evidence, the metallurgy. There has to be a consistency if this teaching is addressed by angelic names to the heritage of ancient Near Eastern civilization that was familiar with these names, the nuances of the angelic names and how they were used. Clearly, there is a consistency in the Semjase story. If this is true, that the negative extraterrestrials came down on Mount Hermon and gave weapons of war, as we're told in the historic books of Enoch, both in the Ethiopic language as well as the Greek. And this is being repeated in modern times by some form of extraterrestrial intelligence, implanting the ideas of ethnic hatred or imbalances between competitive cultures amongst the Semitic people, all who share a common heritage in the belief of God, taking them astray into all sorts of variations of hostility. Then we have to be careful and say this is a wake-up call. This is a, shall we say, a flashing light that we have to be careful as to who we assign our pledge of allegiance to. And I would argue that there is a positive side to the Billie Meier story. It allows us to go back and check the original historic scriptures, as well as the mystical traditions of various traditions, all coming out of the Enoch teaching, which should be the Judaic, the Christian, as well as the Islamic.
What I think is interesting as well, Alan, is that, we believe we are connected with the Pleiades. There are Pleiadian races that exist in various places throughout the universe. When you look into space, there's those that have elongated skulls but still look like us. There's the tall whites, there's the Nordics. These are names that I didn't give these people, but this is the names that others have given them. So I think that that's actually all very important. In addition to that, there's the grays. the reptilians, the insectoids, the praying mantises. So, I mean, it's an interesting case because it is beings that kind of have our form. And I often think people talk about the grays or they talk about the reptilians. They don't think that we exist in space, but we do. And that's even more strange that some being could look like us and still be from outer space. That's because we did not evolve here. That's a tremendous transformation of our thinking, I believe.
And also the context story that I present in my life, having keys of Enoch, giving 64 areas of new science, some of which have been proven by independent scholars that Alan, you know, face to face over the last 50 years have stood the test of time, suggesting be careful now. The Semjase theme is coming back into play. I think that's very important.
No, I'd like to get back to Bret a little bit and see why you think the case, what have you learned from Billie Meier's? Why is the case so important? And how can we use that case to further understanding of ET contact and everything that seems to be coming down in the last few years with whistleblowers and all that? So, Bret.
Well, you know, I go back with JJ and Desiree for quite a few years, and one of the first questions I had with them as we met in Los Gatos at the pizza place, it was a wonderful time, with William Henderson Everyone was actually there accompanying me, was discernment on Earth. Discernment on Earth is super tricky. And if us humans were connected at the head and the heart, and we knew ourselves really well, we'd be able to tell what stuff is just like that. But we're not. We're struggling through, some fumbling through, some have more success than others. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And so we had this issue of discernment. And so when I look at the Billie Meier case, I agree with everything that JJ just said, especially with the discernment. And for me, in particular, on my path, trying to decide who these bad, let's say for simplicity's sake, who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. Deciding who is very, very tricky. And this is especially true with the Billie Meier case. So for me, it's a big lesson in discernment and spiritual growth for an individual to look at this on your own. Forget what the external stuff is going on. It's a hoax. It's not a hoax. He's a liar. Whatever. If you just look at what the information is, there's enough there, I think, to decide if it's a real case. I absolutely think it's a real case. The question for me is, who is Semjase? What's her real agenda? Is she even a woman? Maybe it's a shapeshifter. If it's a reptilian, so if other information is right that reptilians are interdimensional species, maybe like Bigfoot, or we're spirits and they can shapeshift at will, maybe Semjase is not even really a beautiful blonde woman. So we don't know. So all we can do is look at what she's given us, which as a public relations student, that's called a gatekeeper. So they're only telling us what they want us to know. And even with that, they're telling us the truth, but not in a direct way. So this is why I think that the case is real, but that Semjase is really not who she's saying she is, and that it's an offer to contract. Because I don't think they're so stupid to make a cosmic public relations gaffe by choosing the name of one of our most notorious figures to make a diplomatic contact. So huge lesson there.
Wait, I just want to address that. So she chose that name knowing that it wasn't good. For what reason then was that name chosen?
An offer to contract. She's saying, this is who I am, humanity. Do you accept me? Do you argue with me? Do you stay silent, or do you counteroffer? It's an offer to contract. And in business, there's always 4 ways to respond to an offer to contract. I think humanity's largely stayed silent because most people don't even know about the case. And what we really should be doing is counteroffering. And an example of a counteroffer would be, oh, okay, Semjase, thank you so much for your very kind offer of higher consciousness raising technology and pollution cleaning technology and free energy machines. We accept those upon proof of claim that you are exactly who you say you are. And then make her prove it. That would be just one simple off the top of my head way to counteroffer what she's saying. And now the ball's back in her court. We haven't accepted the offer. Now they know we're on our toes now, and we were having trouble with discernment, so we're going to ask that question. She's got to prove up her case now, without just testimony. Show us something else.
Right.
Okay.
What's the evidence for the case? Okay, Semjase, show us some evidence for the case, or we're not going to accept you.
Well, the case has been going on for 50, it's 50 years later or more. Well, what's happening?
Well,
she
it's
contacted
50 years.
Dr. Fred Bell too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Let me just add, I still think the important thing here is going back to the original Book of Enoch and the genetic code structure that we represent. And I think that's really important because it relates to the other contacts, like we're seeing today with abductions. And Alan, you know, a friend of ours, in fact, you gave us a copy of the book. They need us. We don't need them, because some of these other species, like I mentioned, the Greys, they've been cloning themselves too long, and they actually need some refreshment in their genetic pool. So they come after us. There's other aspects, and it's not all the Greys. I mean, some are good, some are bad. I say the universe is very much like our planetary system. That means there's a lot of good people, but there's some bad people, and a lot of the other people really don't care what's going on. They're just like people are looking around and seeing what's going on. But I think Semjase using that name is a point of fact of who and what they are. Maybe they really are behind some of the abductions, some of the, we'll say, hybrid children that people are talking about. And also even just some of the facts of people even missing off of this planet. You know, we'll go back to the war machine. Supposedly our government, the US government, was given two options. One was to put away our weapons of war, and they would give us technology. And then there were others, if you go back to, I think, Valiant Thor, Stranger at the Pentagon, that they didn't need that because other aliens didn't even care that we put away our weapons of war and still gave us technology. So we're in the midst of this really big dichotomy, and our souls themselves are often even looked at as being higher than some levels of extraterrestrials. That's not the intelligence, that's not the brain, that's not the technology. That is the soul potential.
So what's interesting here to all of us, this reference to Semjase is in chapter 6 of the historic book of Enoch. It also is interesting mathematically that in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis is the story of Enoch's appearance at the time that there's a violation of the human race. The attractive women are being inseminated by extraterrestrials, and we know this about Hopkins and other researchers that Ellen and I know personally that this has taken place all over the planet. So why would the ancient scholars put an aspect of the Enoch story so early in the book of Genesis? Most Catholic and Protestant scholars come to the realization that a bit of the book of Enoch was put early in the Bible to warn people. It's not so much the theology of an abstract God, it's the reality that there are other godlike powers that are in rivalry with the God of creation. We call the divine creative lover who sent the Christ figure into the world as a higher example of spiritual ethics, creativity, and ultimate destiny. So there's a underlying theme here that plays itself out also in the other creative scriptures of world cultures, that there is this dialect between those who want to advance us and those who want to make us into hybrid puppets.
Right, and I really want to emphasize that there are good, positive levels of extraterrestrial and what we call, as you know, Alan, ultra-terrestrials, which are much higher levels of intelligence. They are here, they are watching, and they are trying to give us and help us. So I don't want to put everything into the same boat. It's so important that people realize that there's many levels of intelligence.
Well, that's why I want to get back to Bret and see what you find so exciting about the Billie Meier's work. I mean, yes, we can, okay, who knows about Semjase, but what did you get out of it? Why have you become sort of obsessed with it, Bret? And what can we do to share that with the rest of the planet? How's that?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm obsessed with anything, but I would just say that the Billie Meier, just to reiterate, the Billie Meier case is a prime example of not only the dichotomy of reality, let's say, but also that who we're being told are these ETs may not exactly be true. And you find more and more things start to add up on the list. Okay, so she got caught lying. She's chosen the name of a leader of the fallen angels, a notorious figure, one of the most notorious figures in human history. just like JJ and Desiree just described. There's been genetic manipulations that were arguably based on ancient texts. The original offense against God was to mess with us genetically. That's still going on. So at what point on this list do you say, well, okay, this is a bad thing that's going on? So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to decide, is this real beings with love in their heart that have come to earth to help us, like a brother or sister, like a father or mother figure, reaching their hand down to help us up, or are we being fooled based on our own weaknesses? Now that we, if you just look at American education, we've been dumbed down for the last 200 years. The requirements to get into a university 150 years ago are like 10 times what they are at this time. And so you have to really take a look at that and say, well, is that just a coincidence? Or is something steering us down to a place where we're gullible and not knowledgeable so that we can be taken advantage of and willfully give our agreement to participate? Because that's what all contracts require, is full disclosure and a willful agreement to lend your energy to the contract or ritual, because rituals operate on the same rules as contracts. So I'm looking at this whole big picture, and I can point out a few different cases just off the top of my head. Sheldon Nidal, famous contactee from the 80s and 90s. His main contact was a contact named Gory. Now, is that short for Grigori, the Latin term for fallen angels? I don't know. That seems like a pretty interesting coincidence. You go back to Albert Bender. The beings that were saying that they were from Antarctica, he described themselves as demonic, and he was totally terrified by it. The Brian Scott case, on and on, right? Especially when it involves grays. There's this crossover. They're in your dreams. They can affect you psychically. When you look into their eyes, they seem to overpower you. You can look at that two ways. And so you're not getting that definitive proof like you want, like really we would all like, because the spiritual path doesn't always offer that. That's not where you're going to get your growth. You have to look in yourself and look deep in as who you are and decide with your heart what something is or isn't. And that's really all we've got. And ufology, and including the Billie Meier case, offers that to humanity. That's why I say in my lectures, ufology is a spiritual pursuit. Because whether it puts you on the path towards God or off the path, either way, that's a path. Just one road's longer than the other to God. So,
well
yeah,
said.
That's a good point. Thank you for that. That's really good. I think that's the best point I've heard today, is that we're on the spiritual path and we have to make our own discernments, and it's all a lesson, even if it's interacting with other humans or ETs or whatever it may be. It's our spiritual growth that we're here to kind of pursue. And that's why the books that JJ and Desiree have written are so powerful, because people use them to move forward on their spiritual path. So is that all you have to say about the Billie Meier's case, or what about some of the actual facts and evidence and positive things that might come out of that case, Bret?
Well, in terms of the Billie Meier case, I've already stated what I thought I got out specifically of that case, and then being friends with William Henderson Everyone, hearing his insight, hanging out with Lee and Britt Elders and Wendell Stevens, that was hugely important for me on my growth as a ufologist. What I think is interesting is not only is Semjase included in the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch, but later she supposedly made contact with Dr. Fred Bell. And Dr. Fred Bell wrote the book Rays of Truth, Crystals of Light. It's like 700 pages, where he lays out the quote-unquote conspiracy in like the first half of the book, the world conspiracy, New World Order conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, Great Work of Ages, Luciferian invasion of God's creation, whatever you want to call it. And then the second half of the book, he lays out the technology that she's given him. And this is something that you can see all the designs and plans for it in the back of that book. So Dr. Fred Bell himself had a little dark edge to him. If you read that book, this giant being rose out of the water off the coast of California with glaring red eyes and like supposedly psychically transmitted to him. It's some crazy stuff, and I don't really know what it is, but I'm just looking at these patterns, right? So the Billie Meier case for me, just in general, is this example of this dichotomy, and it's an example that we're not going to maybe get the proof that we think we need, that maybe the proof we already have in here, and it's up to us to find that and to find ourselves, connect the head and the heart, and purify our souls to move on. This is why I've studied, JJ and Desiree's books for a really long time now. If you remember, JJ and Desiree, I read Keys of Enoch cover to cover, and when we met in Los Gatos, I had like 60 questions for you guys, and we only got through like 25 of them. So at some point, we'll have to go readdress that when the time's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bret. We'd be happy to do that. So to recapitulate, as a investigative scientist, I'm speaking now independent of all of the others who've looked at the case. I believe that the pictures presented at Jet Propulsion Lab regarding the Billie Meier's contact story are correct. The metallurgy is correct. And I believe that Bret and Lee Elders are honest, good people at heart. I have no problem with them or those even connected with the organization that's investigating an ongoing story. My position is really that there is a much larger picture being enacted where we have to decide, do we go with the extraterrestrials or do we go with God, namely the divine source, in the upgrading of the human race? And I believe that that decision comes down to recognizing the importance of our own ethical decisions, our free will, and the use of our precious bodily fluids that should not be taken from us and used for other purposes or intentions, thus surrounding us to a robot type existence as to a being of integrity, light, and divine love.
Right, absolutely. And I think we can wrap it up with this concept that you brought up, Bret, is that, people are concerned how, if we think about the heavens, are we going to be bombarded by extraterrestrials? And the idea is the more we spiritually develop, as you said, go within, the more we can reach into higher levels that are beyond what we call beyond the extraterrestrial, or even the very positive ones that are trying to help and guide us. So it does take our own development. We believe that we ourselves are empowered enough as needed to be able to reach into those higher realms.
And also from the standpoint of Alan's observations, there are case studies that will be coming out through disclosure, like in my book, Extraterrestrial Retrievals, showing that we do have specimens in military locations that can be the smoking gun as to the visitations being documented from all parts of the world. We're not simply localized in one story from Switzerland. These are events taking place in Brazil, in Peru, in Japan. All over the world, humanity is being given a wake-up call that we're going to take a step towards being cosmic citizens or a step backwards and being simply the subjects to somebody else's medical homework. That in the end game, this is a wonderful opportunity to smell the coffee, to use discernment, and to recognize, fortunately, we do have the majority of the prophets on our side regarding the discernment issue of the angels of light and integrity versus those of mischief. Well, as the great apostle Paul said, we shall judge angels. So this is a classical story of judging the angels or the messengers from other dimensional realms. We have this God-given ability to be cosmic citizens, and this is a wonderful opportunity to see this great roadmap that we're part of. So ad astra, to the stars, to all of you. Until the next time, blessings of light.
So thank you, Bret and Alan, for giving us the opportunity to share these views. And I thought it was a great gathering that we were able to do. And I hope that people get to be empowered by all of this.
Godspeed to all of you watching this program. We thank Alan. We thank all of our listeners, and especially Bret. We thank you, Bret, for your great leadership and your writing skills, and look forward to answering the rest of the questions you gave me many years ago.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. Great to meet you. Great to see you guys again, JJ and Desiree Hurtak. I seem to be running into them a lot lately. But yeah.
I'm definitely going to see you guys at the New Living Expo in May. And I'll be in LA April 4th through 6th at the Alien event at the Sonesta LAX Hotel. And then I'm also booked for both the Sasquatch Family Reunion in Kettle Falls, Washington, June 6th through 11th. Yeah, I've heard about it for years. I'm really honored to be chosen to speak there. And then I just got booked at the Star Knowledge Conference in Pickstown, South Dakota, next November. So
oh, great. Yeah. Who's putting that on? Who's putting on Star Knowledge?
That's the daughter of Chief Golden Light Eagle. He's since passed and passed it down to his daughter, Nikki Zephyr.
Okay, great. And take a look at my book. It's on Amazon if you are interested in that.
Yeah, and Blessings of
Thank
love.
you. Thanks, Brett. Good to meet you.
Thank
We'll be
you
in
guys all.
touch.
Yes.